They weren't maybe at that point being physically assaulted by someone. Um, they are being assaulted um, through all of these other mechanisms at play. So whether it be a physician who says you go in for a bad cough and they're like, you need to lose weight. And I'm okay, but I'm here for what I think is my bronchitis. Right? And they're like, you need to lose weight. You're probably breathing heavy because you're carrying too much weight. And this was what I would hear over and over and over again from women. And that is an active dismissal of a health issue that someone is dealing with.
Yesterday, I was on Reddit, and I sew, I knit, I crochet, I sew, and I am part of the corset subreddit. And these women make these beautiful corsets. And there was one woman who, there's something called tight lacing in corsetry, and it's just really tight. And people were commenting on her, and she says, I have a squishy body. And that allows me to tight lace in closer. And that reminded me of something I read previously about the difference now in our perception of, or our understanding of size versus shape. Historically, when women wore corsets, it was acceptable to be of a larger size as long as you could get the shape, right? The hourglass shape. And the clothing would be designed to adapt to your body. Could be larger, could be smaller, but you got the hourglass shape. But we are now, some would argue, in a more size world, not just a question of your shape, but your size, and it's harder to adapt your size than it is to adapt to the shape. Any thoughts or insights on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that because this is actually something that I saw these conversations I saw taking place a lot when I was doing some of my earlier research on fat women and their life experiences. I was also doing quite a bit of virtual ethnography. So on there was so much presence in kind of like fat acceptance communities and so forth that they was even referred to as the fatosphere. And so one of the kind of things that was discussed frequently was just how much privilege the fat women who had an hourglass shape had compared to fat women who had a more like apple shape, let's say. And so that even within a community that was very intentional about being body accepting and so forth, that there still was like this stigma if a woman's body didn't meet that standard. From the things that I've read, there's everything from evolutionary psychology to sociological kind of thinking about this is most of it comes back to this idea that it may signal fertility or something like that, that having larger breasts and then a larger hips and buttock region would enable then one to be able to perhaps give birth easier, though even though we know that these are not necessarily true, but this kind of belief that is. Yeah.
It's like we're in the 21st century, and I feel like these are still so like backwards mind view. We shouldn't be focusing on that anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear you. For sure. It does. It seems, but it seems like that's with so many things, right? It's unfortunately our bodies and our society are treated as like this blank canvas that we can just, however we want to look, we can look that way. And for some, I guess that is true. If you have tremendous economic resources, then sure. But for most people, that is absolutely not the case. And so we're never going to catch the carrot because the target is always moving. And one decade, or not even a decade anymore, this couple of years, this is the body shape that's in style. And the next couple of years, this is the body shape that's in style.
So, what do you think about the reality shows around fat and weight and obesity? Are we going to ever get past this?
Oh.
Or
Oh gosh. I think it really depends on the shows. I'm going to be honest with you. I try not to pay very much attention to these shows because I think that they are predominantly harmful. And so my best examples would probably be of shows that probably are not airing anymore. About The Greatest Loser. I don't know if that's still, or The Biggest Loser, if that's still airing or not. It was, an international phenomenon. But my gosh, we learned that the participants on that show were just abused, forced to starve themselves and over exercise and verbally abused. And they were teaching them to have an eating disorder. And interesting, I thought about that when you were talking about like that physician telling you that you need to eat less. That this idea, right, that it's healthier to not eat than to have a few extra pounds or something on you and extra. But back to the reality shows, I think that it leads to othering because it is making a spectacle out of people who are just dealing with the pressures of our culture and in our society, right? And as some of them may be experiencing tremendous amounts of discrimination and mistreatment from everywhere, from employers to family members to healthcare providers. And so to see this kind of, I don't know, just making their weight the central aspect of their life, and that weight loss is going to then equal somehow this greater life for them. It just, that to me is just, I don't know, it's exploitation. And it just reinforces so many of our negative stereotypes. And it's because of course they're going to cut out the stuff that doesn't play into the narrative that they're trying to create. And yeah, these shows, I am not a fan. I remember in grad school, this was like in the early 2000s, there was a show that came out, you might remember it. It was called The Swan. Oh
missed
my
that one?
gosh. This show was, oh my gosh. So this was like one of the first shows that was like this. And so basically it was a woman would go in and they would have her in a pair of underwear and a sports bra. And
I remember this show. Oh, yes. Okay. The description alone told me,
yeah.
yes.
And she's standing in front of this table of physicians, this conference table of physicians, and they had her body up on a screen and they marked every single part of her body for being problematic. And then they would go in and perform plastic surgery on her from head to toe. And you would see her then completely covered in bandages, right? And going through and then they would reveal her. So the premise was you're an ugly duckling. And now we have created this beautiful swan. And so then they would have her hair done professionally or makeup done professionally, usually like a family member or spouse or somebody come in and just celebrate this change, right, in her appearance. And our society is really obsessed with these kind of like before and after type shows and so forth, right? Yeah.
Is the pressure on men the same as it is on women to
It's
conform to a standard?
Yeah, it's not, but you know what? It's changing, and it's not changing in the way that I was hoping it would change. Like for years, I teach a class called sociology of the body, and for years I remember saying, I hope we'll get to a point, like toward the end of the semester, I hope we'll get to a point where our bodies are just that, our bodies that enable us to hug our friends and our loved ones and get to the store, to our job, whatever. But yeah, and unfortunately what we're seeing, particularly within younger men, though it is quickly, I think, impacting older men as well, is a tremendous amount of attention being paid to a particular physique. And for young men, rates of body dysmorphia, particularly muscle dysmorphia, are fairly pronounced, particularly in that high school to early mid-20s or something age range. There's just so many TikTok influencers that these guys are like, yeah, I just eat grilled chicken and rice and I look like this, and they're just completely cut and the I hear the men in my classes, they write about these experiences of seeing these men and feeling like that's how they're supposed to look. And so, yeah, sadly, rather than us moving away from being so appearance oriented, I fear that we're becoming even more so. And if we really think about why this is happening, I connect it to our economic system most of the time, right? Because it used to be that women were the primary consumers, and now, as gender roles and so forth have changed, and men consume at similar levels, not quite at the same level of women, but at much more similar levels. And companies are marketing now specifically to men in ways that they never used to do. So men's shampoos, men's lotions, and because God forbid we share, we share a shampoo, right? But I think part of that creation of this new consumer class has led to an emphasis on men's bodies and a particular look. And of course, very similar to women's, it is a white or light skinned, it is a thin, muscular, straight teeth, hair, head of hair, full head of hair, right? Just again, expectations on bodies that are not the norm, right? Yeah.
Well, what do you think AI will do or impact this space? AI actors and AI models that are being created and used instead of real humans. How do you think that will impact?
Oh gosh, I hate to be a pessimist here, but I have a fear that it's going to make it worse because why would they? All of our bodies have what are sometimes called flaws. I don't like to call them that, but they have distinctions, right? We have scars, we have birthmarks, we have all sorts of things on our bodies, and an AI body is not going to have that, right? It's
Mhm,
going to be this absolutely perfect specimen of a body
mhm,
that we see that with retouching and stuff, right? But
mhm.
I feel like it's just going to be celebrating an even more specific, narrow version of human bodies.
Mhm.
I don't know. I hope I'm wrong, but
Mhm. What is body positivity and what is the body positivity movement?
yeah, body positivity is this idea that we should feel good about ourselves and that we should celebrate our bodies and that we're all beautiful. I am not going to lie. I am not a fan of body positivity because I think once again it is creating a standard that is unachievable. I don't know about you guys, but I am incapable of always feeling positive about my
Yeah.
body. I get mad at my body when it
Mhm,
hurts and
mhm,
and just isn't cooperating in the ways that I need it to. And there's no way I can feel positive about my body all of the
mhm.
time. And so I think it's setting up expectations. The body neutrality movement is really, I think, maybe a more healthy, positive message, right?
Mhm.
That our bodies are just our bodies, right? And
I think that-
and let's move away from thinking about them as ornaments and let's think about them more as an instrument, right? That enables,
I love that word. Sorry.
yeah,
That just struck me.
yeah,
Yes, thinking about them as ornaments. That's wonderful. Thank you.
yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Um,
No, that's all right. Yeah, that we do. We decorate and
mhm,
adorn our bodies in ways that, and then to display them, right? And
mhm,
so rather the body neutrality movement would really emphasize that wait, our body's an instrument. You have feet so that you can walk.
mhm,
That all of the parts of our body are important because they enable us to function as a full human being. And but body positivity has been co-opted also by large corporations, by predominantly thin people. And that has, I think, further created issues, particularly in like fat acceptance, because fat acceptance was started in the late 60s and it was actually started by a group of black women And we kind of move more into the early 2000s, even to 10 to 2015. All of the attention in body acceptance was being paid to whites. And it's, wait a minute. And so, and then of course, when corporations picked it up, the Dove campaign, so on and so forth, right? Again, it was this very narrow version. And again, primarily white, hourglass figured.
In November, the federal government struck a deal with drug manufacturers to reduce the price of various weight loss drugs. What are your thoughts on this, and how do you think this is going to impact society?
Oh, yeah. Certainly more people are going to be using these medications, right? And gosh, it happened so fast, right?
Yeah.
Like we went from we went from 2020 where everyone's celebrating like wearing sweatpants all the time. Just being a little bit cushier, right? Oh, it feels good to have a little bit of padding on my body, to these GLP-1s come on the market in 2021, and all of a sudden the celebrities that we see are rail thin. And gosh, I just remember students talking about that especially, and just being like, wait a minute, the Kardashians went from being celebrated for having these kind of more voluptuous bodies, certainly thin, but at least had prominent rear ends and so forth, to being really svelte and small, and then claiming that this was just all through diet and exercise. But so the availability of these drugs, I think, is only going to fuel our fat phobic beliefs in our society. I think that our society is tremendously anti-fat, and I can't imagine that having a large proliferation of drugs that make it easy to lose weight rather quickly at that, right, or is going to change that situation. I think it's just going to make it worse. And then of course, what if you can't take the medication, right? A lot of people are experiencing pretty severe side effects from these medications. And so then we go back to this kind of holding people individually accountable for the fact that they're not changing their bodies, right? And so I fear that there may be then even more stigma and pressure, unrealistic pressures, right, on people whose bodies don't conform to these very narrow standards. There are all of these things available. Why aren't you just using this? And not recognizing the fact that it might, even if it is more affordable, it still might not be affordable for everyone, which it will not be. But beyond even expense is just, my body won't tolerate it. Or yeah, or even just this idea that like fat patients who are body accepting, right, and who are like, I'm healthy, I look the way that I want to look. I do fear that there will be more healthcare provider pressure on those particular people to, why aren't you losing weight? And then who knows what will happen, right? We've already tied insurance premiums to people's body sizes and weights, and yeah. I don't want to go down too dark of a trail, but I can foresee how it could lead to more institutionalized discrimination, honestly.
In one of your articles, The Violence of Fat Hatred in the Obesity Epidemic Discourse, you do discuss this obesity epidemic discourse as a form of symbolic violence. Could you explain this a bit more?
Yeah, throughout the research that I did, so I interviewed 74 women who were quite large women. I know I already said I don't like BMI, but the only way to really describe it so that people can imagine, because we all know what these BMI categories are, right, or know what they are, is to maybe give you a bit of a perspective on it. These were not what are often called small fat people. Most of these women were in a weight range that the medical community would consider morbidly obese. I hate that term. But so one of the things that I found was that the way in which these women were treated by a whole slew of different actors, whether it be their healthcare providers or their teachers or their employers or coworkers, was just how much hate that they had to deal with. And that's violence, right? Like that is a form of violence. And it beyond that, Pierre Bourdieu, French sociologist, right, who wrote initially about symbolic violence, when he was conceptualizing this idea, he wrote about how it's the internalization of the larger, the dominant group's standards. And so we as a society, as I had already said, I think are tremendously anti-fat. And we have individualized that problem. So we've put it on, it's an individual's responsibility to be thin. And if they are not thin, then they're obviously doing something wrong. They're either gluttonous or they're what have you, all of these terrible things. And as such, because that is such a dominant message, and like a taken for granted assumption, people will be like, oh, duh, it's not healthy to be overweight or something. I, again, don't like that word either, but because it implies that there's a particular weight one should be. It's like, well, over what weight? Anyway, I digress. The, that internalization of that dominant group standards then leads one to policing and even stigmatizing and disliking even oneself. And so the amount of shame that these women experienced was just so terrible. It was just so awful. And so while they weren't maybe at that point being physically assaulted by someone, um they are being assaulted um through all of these other mechanisms at play. So whether it be a physician who says you go in for a bad cough and they're like, you need to lose weight. And I'm okay, but I'm here for what I think is my bronchitis, right? And they're like, you need to lose weight. You're probably breathing heavy because you're carrying too much weight. And this was what I would hear over and over and over again from women. And that is an active dismissal of a health issue that someone is dealing with, and just invalidating that and erasing that experience. And I see that as violence. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm also half Chilean. So when I went back to Chile this past year, I just hear conversations where people were like, "Oh, this person is so nice, but she's so fat. But she's really nice. She's really kind, but she's so fat." Like, how in the world does being nice and being kind, and obviously it's not everyone in the society, but it didn't make any sense, especially when maybe there's a reason why these people have health issues, their thyroid, maybe they have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. So they are unable to take off this weight. Or maybe you're under an immense amount of stress, and people take stress differently. So by judging these women and these men unfairly just because they have more weight than other individuals is so unempathetic, and it's very frustrating as well because, like you said, it isn't physically hitting someone, but every word that you say about someone's weight or someone's image is a hit to their self-esteem, their self-confidence that will take years and years and years of therapy and of just trying to believe that you are enough in your body, and everyone's body is different, and that's fine.
Yeah, yeah, I know it took me years I grew up in a family in which both the men and women were stout people. On my dad's side of the family, my aunts being 5'11", 6 feet, and so they were not going to be rail thin women. But it just as a child, the comments of, oh, look at her eat. Oh, wow, she can really eat. Oh, wow, how much do you weigh now? And it took me years to get past that. And that may feed into why I am at the space where I am now of, you know what? I got other things to do. I'm aiming for Oprah money. I'm not going to focus on on this. Speaking of which, this is our last question. If restrictions and money were no object, Jeannine, what would you like to research?
Restrictions or money or no object. Oh my gosh. Honestly, I would really like to expand what I'm doing right now, because what I'm doing right now is just really cool. I'm collaborating with a social worker who is an eating disorder specialist, and she is trained in narrative therapy. And so what we're doing now is we have this pilot study where participants, so it's a women, anyone who identifies as a woman between 18 and 65 can participate. And they have like an intro interview with me where I establish some baseline. I have a pre-test that they take that assesses their body self-esteem, their body appearance esteem, and then also their sexual satisfaction and well-being, because we know that these things are often connected, that when we feel worse about our bodies, we often also are experiencing lower levels of sexual satisfaction and well-being. And so then they have 3 sessions with Jamie, with the social worker who does the therapy, and they do 3 sessions of narrative therapy, and they have homework for these sessions, right? And then they come back to me. They do a post-test, and they come back to me, and I am astounded at what I am hearing from them. I'm talking about women. A lot of these women were, first of all, were therapists themselves, because it's easy to recruit therapists for a study of therapy. But it was so fascinating because so many of these women were like, I've been in therapy my whole life and I didn't make this sort of gains that I made just in these 3 sessions.
Wow.
And so if there was money was no issue, right? Because I'm trying to find money desperately for this study. We would have $1 million and we or multi-millions, right? And we'd have many therapists who were doing these sort of narrative therapy sessions, and have women and men and all sorts of people enrolled. And because I do think that there is really something to it, that it is making an impact. And it's so exciting, but it's so frustrating because we just can't find the funds in this current climate to support women's body image health type research. But yeah, I think that definitely would be it, only because I'm just seeing such a change. And it's like the coolest thing. I was talking earlier about how like depressing my work is. This is fabulous.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you for studying with us today. We hope you can join us for our next podcast episode, where we will have another study session with a discussion of social science in reality.